Good morning, Advocate Johnson.
Good morning, Chair.
How are you this morning?
I am fine, and yourself?
The panel that has been set up by the President. On my right is the Auditor General, Makwethu, Mrs. Ford.
Morning.
On my left is Advocate Majora, Advocate Senior,
Morning.
Mrs. Gogo, and Advocate Mike.
Morning, panel.
You applied for the National Director of Public Prosecution.
I have.
And you are currently a Senior Deputy Director for Public Prosecutions at the NPA.
I am.
And you started in Justice System in 1996 as a prosecutor in Magistrates Court.
Yes, I did.
Followed a stint as a Junior State Advocate.
Yes.
And as well as Junior State Advocate for candidly.
Yes.
And then followed by Senior State Advocate.
Yes, sir.
And later Deputy Director of Special Operations.
Yes, at the DSO.
And you have been involved in many high-profile cases.
Fortunately or unfortunately, but yes, Chair, I have. Yes.
And Oscar Pistorius.
Yes.
Maybe if I ask a question, just curious on this case. You're part of the team that prosecuted, charged and prosecuted the late National Police Commission.
That is correct.
During that time, it appeared that all the accomplices, murderers, drug lords, they were all given amnesty and only one person was charged. Can you tell us what was the rationale behind that?
So if we take the late Jackie Celebi's matter, he was dealt with on his own in terms of the corruption. Glenn Agliotti was to have been dealt with separately. He was found guilty in terms of the drug matter, as was Clinton Nassif. I think the anomaly arises, Chair, for members of the panel with regards to the murder matter of the late Brett Keble, where the shooter and others were given Section 204 indemnity. It was a decision that was taken at the time based on the evidence that we had. I know that there was much criticism at the time about the decision that was taken, but it was a decision that was not just taken by the team, it was a decision that was communicated to the EXCO of the NPA, and in agreement between all the parties. That was the decision that was finally made. I think the sad thing for me was, before we could commence with the actual trial in the Glenn Agliotti matter, that is where he was charged for the murder of Brett Keble, we were removed from the prosecution. And it later ended up in being an acquittal. For me, that was the bigger travesty, simply because when one looks at the decision we took initially, if a team understood the rationale behind that decision and the reason why those 204s were initially given, that would have been carried through in the manner and the strategy which ought to have been used during the prosecution. So it was a decision that had to be made.
Before I move on that one, there was another
When that specific JS fled to Australia, we were still busy with the investigation. The matter was still in an investigative phase. I was the only prosecutor assigned. At the time, the matter dealt with serious economic offenses, totaling almost 4.2 billion. It took a long time to get the investigation going. The challenge that we had, unfortunately, Chair, is that in July 2009, the DSO was disbanded. The matter was then taken over by the police. I then had no insight into the matter, and my opinions were not requested. Extradition was the only option. Documents had been prepared.
So you must still be leading large in the process of crime.
And unfortunately, it is an unfortunate situation.
We gave you a case study.
Yes, Chair.
Yeah. So I'd like you to explain to us that case study, how you respond to it, with particular reference to the Constitution, the NPA Act, the Code of Conduct, as well as the judgments of all courts, especially the Constitutional Court, with specific reference to to you be a fit and proper person to occupy this position of NDPP, especially experience, conscientiousness, integrity, impartiality, taking decisions without fear, favor, or prejudice, all those attributes that we are looking for in order for us to recommend to the President. If you can be specific.
Thank you, Chair. There was no other way to look at that matter other than to consider firstly who I am, which institution I work for, and what my oath is. And that is, I had to take a decision without fear, favor, or prejudice. And so I knew that no matter what decision I arrived at, those are the things that would guide me. And the NPA Act, our policies and procedures, and the Constitution. It is imperative in how a prosecutor with character makes decision. For me, the scenario, and I think unlike the other candidates, and it lies or in the questions that the chair asked, it almost felt like deja vu, especially when one was considering issues of political interference, having to account to the DG, having to hear the minister. And it felt very much like what had happened in 2007 when we were dealing with the Celebi matter. What I must say that did pain me as I was going through the scenario and considering my response was that in 2007, this was the reality one was faced with. And in 2018, to be faced with a scenario, albeit a different kind of individual, but to be faced with a scenario that talks to those very same issues is somewhat painful and sad, because one would have expected that we would have moved on by now. And that is what I had to use. I couldn't walk away from that. And so when I look at the scenario, I guess we have to be careful, because there must be collegiality between the office of the minister and the office of the NDPP. That being said, I think straight up front, I wanted the Minister of Justice to be very mindful that the decision I had to make was a prosecutorial decision. And whilst I would have had to perhaps hear what he said, and I was prepared to hear what he said, if what he said had any evidential value. That being said, I was not going to account and or justify my decision to the minister. And I wanted the minister to upfront understand that I mean no disrespect. But as long as we understand my role as the national director, it is on that basis that I make the decision that I will make the time to see him, I will make the time to hear him, but only insofar as it is relevant to do so. With regards to the DG Justice, the DG is the accounting officer, and of course he's entitled to ask questions insofar as they relate to money, operations, human resources. And he was right to ask for information regarding all of those. And more so because in terms of Section 22(4)(g) of the NPA Act, together with Section 35(1), yes, the Director General as the accounting officer requires such information. So it's not that he was not allowed to ask. But I thought I was a bit smart, Chair, because I considered a response that said, I would try and save the department money. And I have to say up front, it is something I have done for a very long time, from not having claimed S&Ts for over 14 years, even now as a senior deputy. And so what I did is I reassured the DG that I would use the resources that are currently available in the NPA, bearing in mind that all advocates get paid a salary, Chair. So they've got to get to court and get to do the work. And also mindful that I would use an advocate that fell closely within the jurisdiction of where the matter ought to have been had. And so I wanted him to understand that I'm mindful of his concerns, but I'd like to waylay his fears. I think the person I found most interesting in the scenario was the head of state security. And I say this because whilst it is a scenario, it's actually a reality. It talks very much to way back when. So even when they were divided and they were NIA and state security, the mentality of the person that is depicted in the scenario is very much the mentality of the persons one has had to deal with over time. So I did say to him, I did not take kindly to his very rude and arrogant stance. I reminded him, Chair, that in terms of Section 41 of the Constitution, As government departments, we will have courtesies, we will have cooperation, and we will work together. I also reminded him that I also do not take kindly to him directing how the NPA staff ought to be dealt with, and also pointed out that in terms of Section 32 of the NPA Act, I would invoke what needs to be invoked when any party is seen to hinder and or obstruct our decision-making process. But I must say I have encountered many such individuals, and I just found it rather amusing that we had that kind of individual. I was taken aback by the person portrayed as the Deputy National NPS. If there is still such an individual in the NPA, we're going to have to think about reshuffling, because such a person is worrying. First of all, what is the Deputy National doing investigating? No place, no right, at no stage. And what I asked my Deputy National, apart from kindly indicating how he received the information, what the information was pointing out to him that even if, for whatever reason, and it does happen, Chair, information does come to members of the NPA, but we need to follow the channels. And the two channels he ought to have followed were, one, he ought to have contacted the Hawks. The Hawks have a unit called Crimes Against the State, and that is where the information, the evidence, the intelligence ought to have gone to. Duly, he ought to have then contacted State Security and asked State Security to look into the matter. I also reminded him that what we ought to have done is, perhaps there's nothing wrong in making suggestions about a strategic way forward, and should there be the need for legal advice in terms of building a criminal matter, if that was the intention, then that is what he ought to have offered, but he ought not to have taken the matter himself. I don't want to say much about Advocate Smith, because I think we have a lot of them in the NPA. And the problem with someone like Advocate Smith, in terms of the scenario given and perhaps the reality that the NPA currently faces, are people who deal with passage talk. And they take the passage talk as fact. They take the passage talk and then seek to apply it to that which they should not have done. And so I have admonished Advocate Smith about the conduct, about the fact that Advocate belittles a fellow Deputy National, because it should not have been raised with my office. Advocate Smith should have had the decency, the collegiality, the courtesy to please speak to Mr. Ngwenya, to first find out from him what the real stance was, what the real state of affairs was. I also pointed out, I know that the NPA is part of several government programs. We also form part of the 2030 National Development Plan. We also have various strategic objectives in terms of the MTSF. Unless and until she was able to convince me that any of those programs would be affected, I was not even prepared to hear her. Because even if those programs were affected, they should not affect the decision that ought to have been taken in terms of prosecution. The only consideration would have been what financial implications there would have been for the NPA. The rest of the scenario deals with a lot of things that we currently faced within the NPA, unfortunately. And I take Governor, for example, somewhere along the line, and I think it's amazing how the scenario, whilst it is a scenario, Chair, whoever drew up the scenario, well done, because it actually does talk to much of what is going on. And so it was easier to deal with the scenario. People coming late, people not being dressed for the part, the abuse of vehicles, people being engaged in outside remunerative work and not declaring same. Those are currently the evils the NPA sits with. And so I was able to say to Ms. Governor that, first of all, I was really grateful it was brought to my attention, because much of these are swept under the carpet. They're not dealt with head on. And hence perhaps her perception, correctly so, that when she leaves, the office would become one hot mess. And so I did point out to her that I would deal with it immediately, and the best way to deal with it is to ensure that I meet with the DPP for her province, as well as those that would take over from her, and to kindly remind everyone, the NPA has a code of conduct, Chair, one that is non-negotiable, one that must be adhered to. And I intended to deal with it that way. Also reminding her that any employee is not allowed outside remunerative work without the permission of the NPA. We are not allowed an extra income. And we must always look the part, dress the part. And no matter where we work, whether you are a clerk or an advocate, always be at work on time. It is unfortunately, it's a pet peeve of mine, Chair. I'm always way too early, never too late, and I was taken aback by that scenario. I think the rest of the scenario, Chair, unless you want me to go into it. Yes. I'm grateful that the President made the time to write to me, albeit a month later. And for me, it would be an honor to meet the first citizen. I really mean it would be an honor to meet the first citizen. It's not an honor many people are able to achieve. So for the National Director, yes, but I did say to the President that I like what he says in the very last few lines of the scenario. Because he is right. I am a person of integrity. I will always do the right thing. And I pointed out to the President that in doing the right thing, yes, I will meet him, but unless the President has something evidential to add, Mr. President will be mindful that the decision I make will be my decision in terms of my prosecution policy, the law, the Constitution. And that is what I responded to.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Just a quick question. Going through your CV, I see among other functions currently that you're responsible for is the management of all PCLU matters. Can you take us into what happens there?
That was in 2015. I was made the coordinator of PCLU, which means that you took charge of the unit, and it meant that I took charge of the personnel and the matters there. And in terms of the matters dealt with by the PCLU, it is matters dealt with in terms of the proclamation that they were awarded. And it wasn't just TRC matters, it was also matters relating to terrorism. And so for obvious reasons, and I would not go into the detail, but that is the kind of matters one dealt with. And so it meant meeting with stakeholders, meeting with the teams, giving direction, and invariably, the one stakeholder that one met with more often than not was intelligence. So it was building those matters. One of the matters is now currently in court, and it is a matter that commenced, that is the Tulsi matter, that commenced whilst I was there. And it really was about building all of those matters. It was looking at the TRC matters and not understanding why very little to nothing had actually happened prior my time, and having everyone re-look at those matters. And I think the chair would have a bit more appreciation for this, is that I did meet, I forget her surname, Chair, but I did meet with Vanessa in terms of the NCACC matters. And there were lots of problems, and that is the arms control contraventions, and especially with many arms companies in South Africa contravening the relevant legislation, and legislation not being able to deal with them effectively. And what we decided, Mr. Makwetu, was perhaps looking at a board such as the Competition Commission, where one looks at what are statutory transgressions for which one is able to arrive at penalties. I met with her, and I met with their legal advisor, and at the time that I was removed from PCLU, they were already putting that in motion. So it was being plan for priority crimes, and then working out the targets, as well as working out the performance and how each one would deal with the performance. They had a very disjointed way of working, if I might add. I think because they're a small unit, everyone was rather comfortable working by themselves on a matter, and it always took longer than it should have. Where I come from, especially when we look at the DPP's offices, if you look at the DSO, we are very mindful of time and resource. And we have to be accountable for time and resource.
And what is your assessment currently, even though you may no longer be involved in it? What is your current assessment of its success in relation to what was put in place for?
I smile when you ask, because it's a question I asked 2 weeks ago. It was a general discussion amongst colleagues, and we were doing performance assessments. And I actually said, I wonder if I had to walk to PCLU now, what would they account for? Because when I look at what we are supposed to account for, what my everyday prosecutor is supposed to account for, 4 hours 45 a day court performance, looking at 10 to 15 dockets, running 5 or 6 trials on any given day. And then you look at the performance of this very specialized unit. And I say so respectfully because, they are my colleagues. I do get along with them. But truth be told, for a unit that has that kind of so-called expertise, one does not see that productivity. And it is it's really my honest view, it is misplaced. There is no longer the need for that unit. The expertise lies everywhere. There are people across the board in the NPA, and I think this is the mistake they made, Auditor General, is that we have seemed to create the perception that a unit by virtue of its name comprises expertise. It does not. And it is an expertise that must be relooked at. We have to relook the matters. We look at the Timor matter. It's the office of the DPP Johannesburg staff that are now running with the trial. I have a leg of the matter. I am here at the office of the DPP Pretoria. I ask, why? Why, when these matters have sat with that unit from its inception? And it is unfair to those matters. And that is where I come with the submission that one must relook them, because we cannot reinvent the wheel, but we need to re-strategize.
Now, going into the code of ethics of the NPA, you will be aware, and I'm sure you are part of this development, you will be aware of the 5 values that are covered in this statement. Could you please take us through your own role in promoting them, as well as enhancing their effectiveness in the broader NPA?
Thank you, Chair. Very early in the 2000s, we actually had a manager called the Executive Manager Risk and Strategy, and they ran a program called Sere Rubele, and that is where initially much of these values and how we espouse them started. What I do find somewhat interesting, Chair, is that these values are now in a document, and these values are given definitions. And when I look at myself, and when I started in 1996, there was no such document because I started in the Department of Justice. But one learnt those things. They may not have been called Batupile in terms of service excellence. They may not have been called professionalism. They may not necessarily have differentiated between professionalism and integrity and service excellence and accountability. But those are the things we were taught to do. They're just nice words now. They're now in a document. And so if I take my professionalism, I have been, and I am, the way I have always been. I am never late. Even up until now, although I'm a senior deputy, I do a lot of cases in the regional court and in the high court. I get to court between 6:30 and 7. The court staff laugh at me because I now have in the passage, in the courtrooms at the Pretoria Magistrates Court, there's a specific spot I sit at till the courtrooms open, and then I go in, make sure that I greet everyone, even though I was there yesterday, make sure the court personnel understand why I am there. And giving respect to the court prosecutor. He's the resident prosecutor. I am a visitor. I may be his or her senior, but I visit those courts on occasion when my matters require. I make sure prosecutor knows, yes, today I'm only going to postpone, or this is how I'm going to deal with my matter. Professionalism also is having to, in the recent past, somewhat of a challenge has been for me when I have a matter in court on a Monday. And the NPA made the headlines in no uncertain terms on every Sunday newspaper you can think of. And you would appreciate, sir, that as a senior member of the NPA, junior court staff would look up to you and expect an answer from you on what was going on in the NPA. And I have resorted to remind my junior colleagues, for which I know they are grateful, as they've said so themselves, is that regardless of what goes on with the upper management of the NPA, whatever I was there for on that day, and them, could never be compromised. And so I cannot account for my senior colleagues, although I am in senior management. And I feel that that talks to professionalism in the sense of understanding my core function, which is my duty to prosecute. And just in terms of our service excellence and having integrity, even before it became fashionable to do so. Us junior prosecutors, Minister, we used to do maintenance matters and traffic court when you first started. No option, you don't go straight to court. And in dealing with maintenance matters, you would expect, Mr. Makwetu, that I would get some irate females coming in there and asking for lots of money. And much to the horror of a young mother from Katlaong, I said to her, I cannot justify her asking money for a creche and clothes from Woolworths. And she asked me, who do I think I am? And am I not there for the mother? And I said, no, I'm here for the child. I've not seen the father, but you are not a working mother. So the father does not pay for creche. Take care of your child. You are not a working mother, so you cannot ask for money for clothes from Woolworths. You're going to go to PEP, and you will go to JETS. And so for me, in as much as these values are now in a document, it is how I've conducted myself. So it is not difficult to live to those values.
Thanks very much,
Mrs. Fox.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Advocate Johnson.
Good morning, sir.
I would just like to deal with, more particularly, your managerial skills. And you have, to a certain extent, indicated that you are a senior manager dealing with all management issues. From the 1st of February 2015 to date, in your present position. Is that correct?
That is correct.
One of your personal attributes in your attached to your CV is the following, and I quote, I'm excellent at crisis management, dealing with diversity at work and with the work allocating and managing resources and budget control. My experience, and once again, later on, under the heading of management, you once again make a statement, I have managed personnel, projects, cases, teams on cases, and thrive on crisis management. And my experience as an attorney and being a person who has actually been a senior partner in a large firm, experience that crisis management is the worst type of management that a manager can actually deal with. I understand there may be certain constraints, but would you agree with me that if you look at levels of management, and I'll come to the strategic plan just now, that this is the worst form of management, when not one to be proud of in terms of thriving and being excellent at it. What would you say about that?
And I say this respectfully, Mr. Scott. Unlike with where I was attached at various times, and if you take where we had to work and the manner in which one had to work, crisis management was not a manner of I chose to. It was, this is what we have, and we have to deal with it right now. Towards the latter part of my term at the DSO and shortly before we were disbanded, we had to deal with a lot of crisis. We had to deal with the fact that there were constant rumors that we were going to be disbanded, and it took a long time before we were actually disbanded. You had personnel that you needed to deal with, people walking up to you and telling you that I intend to resign tomorrow. For me, that's a crisis. I would like to retain the staff. I needed to ensure that we talked to the office head to find out how best we are able to keep them. The matters that we dealt with were also controversial. One doesn't of necessity talk of crisis as an ongoing, but I am proud of the fact that as and when they arose, yes, I was able to deal with them. So perhaps in the definition as you see it, yes, I cannot take away from your experience, but what you must not lose sight of, sir, is that was not the only management. It was but one of a part of management functions that I had to perform.
One of the other statements that you make is that you have a very logical and calm approach to dealing with issues, but are more often than not still very firm and unwavering. Now, unwavering, the word unwavering to me means intransigent. So if you're looking after the interests of your staff, personnel, and courts, etc., to what extent is an unwavering approach on your part to actually listen to and deal with the concerns of those personnel under your control and management?
In fact, what it does talk to, sir, is that unwavering does not of necessities mean that I am not understanding, that I am not amenable to listening. Unwavering simply in the circumstance, and I guess it would have to talk to circumstance, Mr. Scott. In terms of the circumstance, all that it would mean is I am unwavering in perhaps my stance of right and wrong, and of always adhering to what is right and wrong, and always understanding what is expected of me. That is my unwavering stance. It is only on those aspects, when it comes to those aspects, that I am unwavering. But what one would find is that throughout my work history, because of the things that one had to face and the diverse issues one faced, especially if you take the DSO, for the first time I understood that investigators came there with qualifications that some of us advocates at the time didn't even have. And so one had to be unwavering in your stance in how you deal with things, but being able to listen, to comprehend and understand. I learned diversity, but that doesn't mean I always have to be wavering in my stance. I'm unwavering when it is in terms of policy, in terms of process, and in terms of doing the right thing.
One last aspect that I want to deal with is that of your strategic plan. Under the heading of strategy and planning, you said here that I've engaged in strategic planning and implementation since the year 2000. I believe in always having a strategy, bearing in mind that not all strategies have to be formal, but serve as a guideline of implementation tool. My difficulty with that approach is, if it's not a formal strategy that you formulate, firstly, where is the accountability when you're looking at monitoring such a strategic plan? And secondly, where are the key performance areas recorded for staff to know exactly what their responsibilities are, and in fact abiding then by the strategic plan that has been formulated by you in that capacity as the manager with that responsibility?
Perhaps I should have expanded, sir. The strategies that I talked to that ought not to necessarily be formal were strategies that were adopted in approach to the projects and the cases one dealt with. More so because that strategy talked to what we needed to do at the time. Many of those became formalized later on when all of the stakeholders were on board, everyone understood what the focus was, what we were going to investigate, what we considered prosecuting, and who all the outside role players were to be. But in those initial phases, in terms of the projects, not all strategies were formalized until a later date. But in terms of how the DSO, in terms of the DSO Gauteng, in terms of the PCLU, and in terms of the DPP's office, all strategic plans are formalized before the start of the financial year, as are all the APPs, that is the annual performance plan, and all of our senior managers are given tasks, timeframes, and duties for which we are accountable. That is a non-negotiable. But the strategies there, I concede, may not talk to what I've answered. It dealt more with the work that I had to deal with.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, sir. And Casey?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Councillor.
Good morning, sir.
Firstly, I must admit I am quite pleased with the manner in which you presented your case and your understanding and analysis of the issues. But what I want us to focus on from my side is the question of your leadership and the problem that besets the NPA currently. I'm saying this against this background. Mr. Bulelani Njuka served that office 1998 to 2004 only for 6 years. He could not complete his tenure. You see, Kikoli, 2005 to 2007, only for 2 years, he could not complete his tenure. In chair acting, no, we don't know what happened. And Smelano, 2009 to 2012, only 2 years. Chiba acting, we don't know what happened and what is happening. Nasana, 2013 to 2015, that's only 17 months. Sean Akram, 2015 to 2018. That is very clear. This scenario paints us an ugly picture of that institution. Do you accept that?
I accept it. I wish the upper management of the NPA did. It's about time we stop making like we are ostriches. We are all advocates. We are supposed to be professional personnel. And hiding, and especially when we go to Parliament and we report to the Portfolio Committee and they ask us about all our problems and we all just give numbers. Numbers do not talk to the problem we have. And I agree with you. There is an issue.
I will allow you time to expand yourself. That must be looked at against the background in the matter of corruption watch versus NDPP. In the judgment that was done, where yes, this was so. The events that are at the center of this proceeding are in the public domain. Judgment of the High Court notes that it was common cause before that court. That since September 2007, the recent history at the NPA has been one of paralyzing instability. We accept that there has been a paralyzing instability in that institution.
There has been instability, yes.
Paralyzing.
And I want to provide a proviso to the word paralyzing, and there's a reason for it. As I sit here today, on the 15th of November 2018, for an interview for the position of the National Director, the NPA out there is not at a standstill. It is not paralyzed. I have junior colleagues who are currently in court doing cases, doing them well. I have colleagues that are perhaps appearing either at the SCA or in the High Court. And I just want to clarify, we are not paralyzed, but we have had serious instability, and at times we have been quite chaotic. Because sorry sir to interject, if I do say paralyzed, I do not give credit to the men and women who wake up every single day, regardless of what NPA top management is doing, and do the work.
One of the demonstrations that indeed the situation is paralyzing instability. The chair here asked you a question in a matter which is your highlight in this proceeding when you say interview, that object state, where you only out of several people that were involved, veterans, draft laws that were involved, you give them all pattern. Nothing is being done. You are personally involved. And your explanation and yet to understand it, except to say, I was removed from this case. What happened to those people if the situation is not paralyzed?
I understand your take. And that is why I said, sir, one had to understand that matter. And if the prosecution was conducted as I knew it ought to have been conducted, the result today would not be the same. And then this entire society would have then understood the rationale behind giving the 204s. That opportunity did not arise in the manner in which the trial was conducted.
No, the point is the perception outside there, which myself I do have. You are only interested to convict and send Mr. Security to court to demonstrate that you can take down police, big police. You are not interested in the resolution of the crimes that were committed. That's the perception. Hence, that case even today is one of your cases that is described in the nomination as high-profile cases today. Once you get Jerusalem, you are less interested to in other cases. That's a picture. I'm not saying you, I'm taking because you are more the point to paralyze itself.
I hear you.
Why you cannot agree with me on this?
No, look, I don't disagree that there's instability. I think what I'm trying to say, sir, is I don't want us to say the NPA is paralyzed because there are people who work, people who achieve what needs to be achieved. Do you think that the NPA management is currently, with all respect, able to go to the portfolio committee, able to present an annual report without these people had we been paralyzed? I agree with you. Certain decisions may create the perception that they ought not to have been taken.
I'm telling you to a specific. I mean, there are two that the minister has taken. You to the one for participator. In fact, that case is nomination. One of the highlights that I've seen everywhere, I mean, it was this and even nomination, is that the cases that you were involved in were high profile. Was the Judge State versus Judge Slate. And we know in that case, there was a lot of draft lawyers that were involved, people who faces charges of murder. Nothing was done out of that. And you don't, in your explanation, go further than to say, I was removed from this case. That's all that I cannot know. Is it not a situation of saying, well, I got what I wanted and then I don't care what happened?
I think you're incorrect in part in your summation. It is incorrect to say nothing happened. Glenn Agliotti was found guilty for drug trafficking. Clinton Nassif was found guilty for drug trafficking. Those were the main kingpins in terms of the drug matter. Paparas, the matter went to court. We had a full trial. Yes, they were acquitted, but there was a full trial. I think the only place where there must still be an issue is that in terms of the murder matter itself, that is where the 204s came into being, with the Mikey Schultz and those people. But that matter went on trial. So I don't want us to create the perception or the idea that there were no prosecutions. Yes, there were. I do agree with you that the public perhaps feels more than just them ought to have been prosecuted.
As I understand it, because please correct me if I'm wrong. If I correctly recall, he was not pardoned by the court, is it not so? His evidence was not accepted, and therefore he was not pardoned, ought to have, out of that case, arising from that case, if I'm wrong, please correct me, because it's not a wrong. Ought to have been followed, and that one was just right in your hands to do that.
Whilst certain things seem to have been right in our hands, at the time, do not forget who the head of the NPA was. The head of the NPA at the time was Menzi Simelane. We had serious issues with him as the national director in terms of not understanding what we wanted to prosecute. It is out of that we had the Janwala Commission of Inquiry. And so when that matter was done. We were not able and allowed to deal with any other matters. So whatever may have flowed, you are right. Something ought to have happened. But we were not given an opportunity for that to happen.
So, to us, you are telling us that at least made interference in those prosecutions. He was interfering.
Yes.
He was interfering unduly in actual matters.
Yes, because it is on his instructions that we were removed from the matters. And even if you take the Mulangi Mpehu matter, there are other matters, sir, that ought to have gone to court that we initially started. And I do understand your frustration and perhaps the perception. But when you are not allowed to prosecute, if the head of the NPA does not give you that opportunity, I cannot take a matter. I am not an island, nor was the team.
In these circumstances, because at the end of the day, we are not sitting here seeking to employ a prosecutor. I must correct that. We are seeking to employ a head of that institution who is a prosecutor. That is a head and leader. Yes. Now, for that leadership, we just have to get to some of your background.
I understand.
Actually, the guide in the constitutional court. My point is, yes, is a senior interfering what are the remedies available to those juniors who feel strongly that no, these things that this person wants us to do are wrong and unlawful? What are your options?
If one takes at the time, and the fact that at the time he was the national director, honestly, if you asked me then, I think apart from the fact that one was so shocked that he even went that far, there wasn't anywhere to go to. And I'm being honest, at that time, I'm not saying now we don't have that recourse. I think we have at the moment a Minister of Justice that is open and one is able to raise the complaint of the NDPP's interference on that level. We have a president with whom one can raise those issues. At the time, we didn't have that. We had a president at the time, and that must be his decision. But it is a decision that is communicated to us. We had a president at the time who did not want us to proceed with that prosecution. So what I'm saying is...
In that case, you are suggesting that there was an influence from the president as well. You were the president who doesn't want us to proceed with the case, meaning that he was involved in some way into the case. He doesn't want to proceed with the case.
Most correctly so, and that was aired and ventilated in great detail during the Jinwala Commission of Inquiry. The role of the then president, the role of Menzi Simelane then as the DG of Justice and his inappropriate conduct. And then, as Murphy's Law would have it, he ended up being the national director at the time we're conducting these prosecutions. So at the time, yes, our hands were tied. I think things have changed in terms of our ability to raise these issues, albeit not within the NPA as it currently stands.
That's exactly where I am. South Africa has been a constitutional democracy since 1994. In fact, when this dispensation kicked in, you are the Constitution as the supreme law. No one could be above that law, even the president himself. But now it seems as if according to this debate, if next year, or next year, there are elections next year, if some president some president who has these different views and this understanding, then again the NPA will be succumbing to the elections.
No.
No, your statement is that you are saying things that different because of the president who is different from that one. Meaning that our independence as the NPA is dependent on who the president is. Is it not a suggestion correctly that I must accept?
No. I'm saying to you, as it was. If you consider where we're at now as the NPA, this is the first time. Take your constitution of this panel. It is a first time. And the reason for it is to make sure everyone understands the role, function, and the independence that the national director not ought to have, will have. And so regardless, and I say this tongue-in-cheek, Chair, so if I am appointed as the national director, who the president is, and I say this respectfully, will not deter from the work I have to do. It will not deter from what the people in the NPA will be requested to do. That is the difference. The difference is, and I think it pains me a lot because I've actually had this discussion with the previous national director. When he was appointed, I was the coordinator at PCLU, he was a senior state advocate at the time. He gets appointed, he's moved out of our office obviously, and at a stage when I was able to, I asked for a meeting with himself. And I remember sitting across from him and telling him, I want you to please remember in your chair that perception is half the battle. Do not allow perceptions about the NPA and how we function to continue. Deal with it head on. He chose not to listen. And what I'm saying is, give credence to the 11 candidates you've shortlisted. We are ready to stand tall. I cannot put only me. I look at your shortlist. I think every single person is ready to stand tall and say what was can no longer be. And I think you've got to take us at our word.
The point exactly, the point I'm making is that in fact we have agreed that in that institution, that is NPA. And I can't understand you want to say, well, the instability at the head office cannot judge it as an instability reflecting the picture or the image of the NPA. Every institution is looked at with reference to its leadership, is it not?
It is so.
Yes, so let's agree today, you and me, that in that NPA, there is complete chaos within the leadership, and that leadership has to be fixed. I think that one we have to agree so that we move forward and deal with the answer that the question, the statement that we just made.
No, I can't even add to that, because that is God's truth. If we're going to move away from that, then it is irrelevant who you appoint as the head of the NPA. And I want to say this. I talked when we found out that there might be a panel put together as the president envisages a different process to appoint the head of the NPA. I actually remarked to a colleague, where the NPA is currently, you can appoint the Pope. The place as it is now, if it is not changed, will chew the Pope out and spit him out alive. It is a different animal. You need to walk in there accepting the reality of what it is. Hiding our heads in the sand is not going to change it. So I can't take away from you.
Now, we cannot. Challenging the NPA itself, its decisions, appointments, and all those. More and above, as I understand, about 2 deputy directors, they are on suspension or they are subject to disciplinary hearings.
I believe they are on suspension on full paid leave pending a commission, or at least pending an inquiry.
Yes. And also other directors that are there from the picture I've got, is that in the NPA there are factions. You accept that within the NPA there exist factions. Are you aware?
I think a true leader must accept the picture as it is, and that is the picture. I cannot of necessity tell you how those factions may be comprised, composed, what their methodology is and how they came to be. But that is a reality.
And yourself, you are being perceived, I know, you are being perceived to be part of a particular faction. Surely.
I would like them to tell me which faction.
No, what I'm saying, you are perceived by those directors, by those leaders that if you be careful of yourself, you belong to a particular, even if you don't, as you are saying, you don't belong, but surely there is a perception that you are part of a particular faction.
Perhaps to answer that, and I think why I'm not considered part of a faction was how I was dealt with when I was at the PCLU. You know, having done what I always do, it's just to get them to do the work. And I think that is where the head of the NPA ought to have been. It is an unbelievably important position. Should have got in there, done the work, and don't be the boss and be the leader. You are not the owner of that institution. You carry that institution. You know, it's best said, awusiyo umphathi umnikazi. Awusiyo umnikazi umphathi. And in this instance, umphathi, carry it, and carry it reverently so. That is where the NPA made a mistake, and why they could not. And I would love somebody to come up and say, in terms of my perception, this is the faction you fall in. I was at the PCLU. I am a senior deputy director of public prosecutions. Early in January, February of 2016 or late 2015, I forget, I was so traumatized. I'm in a workshop. I'm called to come back to the VGM, which is the NPA's head office. I said, but we're in the middle of a workshop, and it's a workshop at which I play an important role. No, you've got to come back. I come back. Yes, what's so urgent? You've been asked to leave. I mean, you could have slapped me, literally, because I was that taken aback. That was not what I was expecting. And I asked, whatever for? No, the national director feels you were seconded from the DPP's office, you need to go back. I said, but what for? And this is the NPA. We do as we please. unjustified, not adhering to any code, not adhering to any law, and not adhering to the prescripts of the Constitution. I was not given a proper answer. I sat there and said, before I leave, ask the national director if he is prepared to kindly see me and indicate himself, because he's given you this instruction. Phone call is made and I hear the national director say, no, he doesn't need to see me or doesn't want to see me. That is how we operated. When I left, it then transpired. It was because advocates were then brought in to deal with certain matters, like the Johan Boyson's matter, like the matter with Ivan Pillay. And what I'm saying is, in terms of that perception, I believe that the reason I was removed is not perception of I may belong to one or the other. It is the correct perception. They would not have been able to do the work they thought they could do at PCLU if I was there.
Yes. But quite interesting on this is that they look more than the perceptions that the NPA, the political influences, and those things are not being said. But within the NPA, the devil has been inside there, from what you're saying. That is, the NPA itself had compromised, that is, the institution has compromised itself to an extent that it will not touch from what problem. Because if there is, you are assigned to do particular cases, but if presume the outcome might not be a particular way, they just remove and put other cases. So the interference was within the NPA itself.
Oh yes, we didn't need other people to interfere. We did it very nicely. Our management did it very nicely, unhindered so. And I think, sir, the sadness to it all was, in the end, over and beyond members of the NPA who suffered, it was the public who suffered. It was the public who suffered because they had to look at us running around like headless chickens, having to justify to courts why we ended up with some of the decisions we had. They were not sound in law. They were not sound in fact. How does an NPA arrive at that? It could never be.
All right, let's come now to you now, because you are already in the prosecuting authority. All what we want now is the leadership. We apply it, we would like to be considered as a head of the person who will not tell us this. She has the requisite legal qualification, to which I agree. She is an admitted advocate, to which I agree. She is presently employed at the National Prosecuting Authority and has been for 22 years. For 22 years, which I agree. Transformation, as she is from a previously disadvantaged group. That's true. She has an impeccable service record within her. That's all. We think for a leader, these are the only things that. Where is your leadership? Demonstrate your leadership to show that you can head that institution.
I don't know who would have summarized it that way, but in terms
I know that
the PCLU.
Yes.
In terms of the leadership, and unfortunately, sorry that I have to keep going back to it, but that was 10 years of my senior management and professional career. In terms of the DSO, there was that leadership. We were a new animal, created to work, investigators, advocates, analysts, all for the first time. It was understanding what the DSO mandate was, applying that DSO mandate, but more so being able to take those diverse individuals from their various backgrounds, putting them together and having them understand what the common goal was. It was not easy because, as I said earlier, Chair, we had investigators who had perhaps even more legal qualifications than some of the advocates at the time. Everyone wanted to be boss. It's the ability to take a group of people, assign them to a matter, lead them through it in the sense of having them be committed, having them achieve their targets, having them understand what the common goal was.
Yes. But that applies within the internal setup of this. As a leader of the NPA director, you have to liaise with other stakeholders, you have to have an ability to effectively represent that institution.
Yes.
And also potential and capacity to respond to these instabilities that we're talking about. I don't see you outside the NPA. I don't see your leadership there so as to satisfy myself that you can interact with the broad stakeholders that are in the criminal justice and society.
Perhaps it's not reflected there for whatever reason, but I liaise fully and engage with outside stakeholders. In fact, if you go to my office and you speak to my DPP, that currently is one of the aspects I really deal well with. I engage with the various police units. I represent and engage on behalf of our office in the Gauteng's Provincial Projects Committee, where we assess the various police projects. I meet with the stakeholders provincially, not just in Gauteng, but we also take care of Mpumalanga at the moment. The Criminal Matters Amendment Act was a new act. No one knew how to deal with the act in terms of the theft and damage to infrastructure. It's a serious issue. I engaged with the various stakeholders, and the stakeholders are not just police. The stakeholders are businesses across the globe, parastatals, government departments. We sat together. We've worked out the strategy on how to deal with criminal matters. So it's not within the NPA, it's outside of the NPA. 2 weeks ago, I had to attend and represented the NPA and actively assisted in dealing with the I usually use the acronyms, the cash in transit strategy. The head of the Hawks asked that we develop a strategy, which is a national strategy for 5 years. So I work outside of the NPA and represent the NPA on many of the forums that are not NPA specific. I would, in almost all circumstances, be the only NPA person there. But one has to understand the business, not just of the NPA when you attend these meetings, attend these engagements. It's understanding who your role players are and what their outside expectation is of the NPA, because they represent industry, they represent the public, and they represent the other legal fraternity. And we also have a lot of those stakeholders who are parastatals but also have international ties. And so you would appreciate, if I use just that as an example, you would appreciate that with all the cable theft and the power shortages that occur, there is a worrying trend. It is a worrying trend, and outside investors worry about the state of our country. The only way I can deal with it is, mine is not a political solution. So what we do is work out strategies together with industry, together with the legal fraternity and the police, on how best to engage, how to use the legislation, and how to arrive at outcomes that suit all of the parties.
I'm about to conclude, I know that. Like the point, the two cases that are quoted, the state versus the lady, and state versus prosecutorials, you were just a junior. You are not representing, you were assisting Mr. Ferdinand. You are not leading, you are just a junior. And West with this lady were already agreed. A lot broke loose. A lot of the real criminals were left outside there. I'm not saying Mr. Slade was wrong, but the criminals, landlords, they were left unattended.
Whilst I understand that they refer to those two matters, every prosecution doesn't have to be in the public domain. And so I prosecute many, many matters. I currently have several matters that I deal with myself, as I have had over the years. And when you look at those two matters, I understand the concept that one deals with in terms of junior, because usually that is how court people speak. There's a senior and there's a junior. But I was by no means a junior player in the equation of the team. I brought my part in terms of, we discussed all of the work, we drafted all of the documents together, we took many of those decisions together. We decided that in terms of how we're going to prosecute, one thing I do not like is, you lead the one witness, I lead the one witness. You lead the one witness. That doesn't make me senior. But I by no means saw myself as a junior or insignificant member of that team.
Simply because how I see it, the reason for referring to these cases, because these are TV cases, all that, there is nothing peculiar about these cases. It was just ordinary cases, because the real cases that at least you should have reflected for me to understand and assess It's those sort of cases that we're talking about in other cases which maybe have been complicated. Was it Westwood, the case of Spain, where all was still angry as a society, that people were murdered, people were just left to lose status on the streets.
And I understand that, and I take it from where it comes, but that is what the person who nominated me would have said, and may not necessarily have thought to reflect all of my cases. But I am not those cases. I am an advocate dealing with several matters across the board.
As a prosecutor, you are a public As a prosecutor, as I understand, you are a public lawyer. You agree with me that the accused, the complainant, the accused, the police, and the court, all these people, you do have their interest.
Always. Always.
The emphasis I get from you is that, maybe I'm wrong, correct me, that prosecutor at least must try for conviction of prosecutor. Correct me if I got it wrong.
You got it wrong, unfortunately. I have always, and I've publicly said, even to my junior colleagues, prosecuting without fear, favor, or prejudice does not mean prosecuting by all and any means. That has never been what a prosecutor worth his or her salt must do. You present a fair and objective case. It is something I looked at from the time I initially started. You have unrepresented accused way back when I started. I would ask my court orderly and my interpreter to stand next to me. And I would try to find out why Undate stole a block of cheese from Checkers in Alberton. And he would say to me, "Ma'am, I'm hungry." So I had to explain to him what theft means, what the charge is, and explain to him that you have to know that what you did is criminally wrong. And if you deal with your matter, I will ensure that the court understands that what you did was out of hunger and someone like you cannot go to jail although you committed a crime. Something I did in 1996 when we didn't have all of these things. So I agree. We are part of, never on our own.
Thanks, Advocate Andrea.
Thank you, Chair.
Sawubona Ndatunjani. Angikhali namhlanje. Well ngiyakhala ngoba kugcwele amadoda kuphela. Abafazi bakuphi anginalwazi. Bakuphi abomama banama abantu base media ndade akusi ipanel. Apha bosisi bami banama qualification okungicela ukuthi sisi ufuna ukuba iNDPP chazela lendlo ukuthi why.
Now, in your CV, you say that you have very some communication skills, especially language, and I agree with you there, but communication involves a lot more skills.
Yes.
And so can you tell us what other communication skills you have? And how do you think those skills would help you if you were to be recommended and inshallah be appointed by the president of the national director?
And perhaps this is where the many national directors failed, is the ability to listen. Don't hear, listen. And you listen to everybody, stakeholders from within and without. Your staff, your personnel in terms of your professional advocate component, as well as your support staff. So the communication is not just the ability to speak the different languages, although I must say, Advocate Majola, for me, I have learned, I come from rural KZN. I was taught that when you speak to a person in their own language, our people consider it respectful. And so that is what I do once I know what language you speak. Esawote, Tuzane nasemzinto. And the ability not just to speak, but to listen. But not just to listen, is also to understand what is being conveyed. Whilst you are listening, part of your communication skills is being able to distinguish between the wheat and the chaff. And then dealing with the issues at hand. You have to be able to listen more than you just speak. But it's also the manner in which you convey. You know, being loud does not make you effective. Being arrogant does not make you an effective national director. Being humble, hearing what people have to say, are the qualities one requires, simply because people mustn't think as well that humility means pushover. I don't want you to think for a single second I am not strong. I am. But there's a way in which we communicate and convey.
Actually, when you presented your case scenario, I thought that you were actually taking no prisoners very hard. Very firm, am I right?
I am.
Maybe over firm, more than firm, to the extent that in communicating your view, you may actually lose people.
At times, I think it depends on the forum and the reason for it. But also, being firm does not mean I need to be arrogant or need to be rude. If there's two qualities I cannot take, be it in a colleague or be it in anyone I deal with, is rudeness and arrogance. So firmness, yes. And unfortunately, Advocate, I speak to the converted, you would know. Sometimes there's a firmness in how we deal with what we have to deal with, more so because one needs to convey a specific point.
No, sure, you're absolutely right. What I'm trying to say is that sometimes people are firm and inflexible. You know, and they will listen, but they will not change their mind no matter what.
No, that is not me. Being firm is a manner of having to convey what I have to at the specific time. But being flexible for me is different. It goes to what I said initially. You first listen, hear what needs to be heard, and then convey your message.
My second issue is about, you know, I was very impressed when you said you think people should properly dress, they should arrive on time, they must be prepared when they arrive, and so on. You know, that is good, but does that then make you some form of a perfectionist who may take with you some of the people, but leave others behind, and therefore, you know, affect the team spirit?
It's all about the where and the when. And so when you're in an organization such as the NPA, when we go to court, there is decorum to be had. I might meet you in my office, and I'm not going to court, and be formally dressed. That is allowed. Not that you must be in shorts and sneakers, but what I'm saying is flexibility is to be had, but it all talks to the forum and the reason. There is nothing worse than having a prosecutor stand up in court and looking sloppy. There's nothing worse than when you go to the NPA's head office at the VGM and there's corporate staff, but they're walking in dressed in skin-tight jeans and short tops. It doesn't talk to what the institution requires. So there's flexibility, yes, but it will all talk to what the reason for it has to be.
Now, a lot has been said about the NPA, and if you were appointed to head the NPA, how would you deal with all these issues? You know, issues of discipline and so on. Considering, of course, that now you will be charged not only of just, you know, one office, but many offices, some of them very far away.
I think it's important to note that the NPA, and I've got to be very fair to the NPA, the NPA hasn't always been in where it's currently at. It's taken a lot of doing. It's a lot of build-up. It's a lot of management that went wrong. And that is why we are where we're at. It hasn't always been like that, and it would be unfair on any of my colleagues, be they corporate services or advocates, to create the perception that that is where they have always been.
No, nobody's suggesting that.
This is where they've come to.
What people are suggesting is that where it is now is not the right place.
Yes.
And we are looking for somebody who's going to lead the NPA back to where it's supposed to be. And the question is, how would we do that?
It's attitude. And I think perhaps we are looking for a very profound answer on what all we're going to do for the NPA. There's nothing wrong with how the NPA was styled, how it ought to work, its structures. But what one needs out of a national director is someone who leads by example. And the leading by example is not just integrity. It is not just service excellence, but it is professionalism. It is accountability.
In the sense that you will lead by example at head office, but whatever you do at head office will be invisible to the rest of the NPA.
It won't be, because that is why we are where we're at. Many people see the NPA's head office as the norm and standard of where the NPA is, and that is incorrect. The head of the NPA has to understand that it has to filter down and meet with his directors of prosecution, public prosecutions, meet with the deputy nationals. Everyone has to go back to knowing why it is we are there. A lot of people have I think they've just let things fall by the wayside, Advocate Majela, because it was just easier to not instill and continue to instill discipline, not just in terms of time and dress, but how we perform as advocates, understanding more especially that we need to be able to give a proper service to the public. So what happens is how we dress at the NPA's head office, whether we like it or not, has filtered down because people see us as the example. And what I'm saying is, even if you walk in there, being on time, hearing what the people have to say, making sure that management understands their role and function. And make no mistake, in terms of the way the NPA is structured at the moment, the structure works. One has to consider the people who have to promote how that structure works. And that is the biggest hurdle the head of the NPA will have, is making sure that his or her management is able to buy into that all-inclusive management skill.
My question is, I'm trying to imagine you being at the NPA, seeing you on TV, hearing that this and this and this and this is what you're doing. You are telling me of the ideal and national director of public prosecution, but not about what you would do.
As the NPA currently is. I hear you. As the NPA currently is, when I walk in there as the national director, is first dealing with that upper structure of management, because they are the problem that filters down to the rest of the NPA. That factionalism has to be dealt with, because whether we like it or not, it's interfering with how we work and how the public perceives us. Is walking in there and reassigning some of the individuals, because some of the individuals have overstayed the welcome in terms of their portfolios. One must not...
But you're good at communicating. What's wrong with calling everybody together and say, well, let's talk about this. Look at the image of the NPA, and we can't go on like this. Are you guys willing to change? This is the direction that we should take. Are there any takers that want to go this direction with me?
One aspect I did consider, Advocate Majola, is that I did say that once a person walks in as the head of the NPA, I think what is important is not to further antagonize everybody, but you have to be real. Some of the upper management structures, especially your deputy nationals, have become very complacent in their ways. They have joined those factions. One has to deal with them somewhat differently. But if you take our directors of public prosecutions, our special directors, what I would do is have a one-on-one. It is something I have done in the past, is to call Advocate Majola and say, sir, you're the DPP of Johannesburg. These are the issues one currently faces with regards to your office. Your office doesn't prosecute cases. You look for reasons not to prosecute. Your advocates do not look like advocates. They do not prepare fully when they go to court. My proposal, I say tongue-in-cheek, is to say, this is what is required of you for the NPA. Not just are you prepared, but I would like you to take the time off to make sure you understand your role in the NPA.
But you see, this is what confuses me, because you say you are good at communicating, and that communication skills include listening, but you call a person to tell the person to do something. You're not saying, I will call the person and say, guys, what's wrong? Why are there so many divisions? What's bugging you?
Yeah.
What can we do to remove whatever makes you behave in the way you are? And then say, after considering all this, I think you should go there. You would call a person, tell the person that this is what you should do.
Perhaps let me rephrase what I actually meant. Is not calling and telling them what to do, is calling them to explain what I understand is the problem. Each individual has to get that opportunity. yes, they will be asked to give. Now that's what I said. Kindly say where you see us going to. Do you agree that this is wrong or not? It's not about, because that is the problem with the NPA. At the moment, that has been the problem. We have been dictated to. And so it's not a simple matter of, and I think maybe Advocate Majola, being out of the NPA, it seems a bit simplistic to say. You call everybody in and you say, guys, what is the problem? Where we're at currently and where the NPA is at currently, it needs a firm approach. A firm approach does not, and by no means says, it's not an approach that is consultative and it is not an open process. But at the moment, there are certain decisions that one will have to make because the public has an expectation. They don't want to wait for tomorrow. They don't want to wait for next year. Because while we mollycoddle one another, we are senior managers. The people in there already know what went wrong. And so we can't mollycoddle one another. There are certain decisions that will have to be taken. But at the same time, no NDPP can begin to think that when she walks in there, it is like putting a little bull in a china shop. You cannot do that. You would have to talk to your management, yes, but you also have to understand what went wrong and knowing what you can deal with immediately. And that is why I say, when it comes to the deputy nationals, one has to deal with it immediately. Not non-consultative, but immediately. And maybe that is where I add in creating the impression that, oh, I walk in and you do, and you don't do. No. Yes, it is a consultative process, but you would be remiss if you don't walk in having an idea on how to fix the problem. That is, a leader goes in knowing what he or she faces and be able to take a decision. That.
Thanks, Advocate Celia.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Advocate Johnson.
Good morning, Advocate Celia.
Would you agree with me, the NDPP, one of the main issues or one of the main aspects that should be taken control of is the investigation and prosecution of corruption in South Africa. That's one of the main concerns of the general public presently, and an aspect which they hold against the NPA is the non-prosecution of people who are, on the face of it, may be guilty of corruption.
You are correct. I remarked, when colleagues talk, I couldn't understand why we currently sit where we sit. If you look at the state capture matter, for example, there's a different approach to be had. It's not about putting a team together and going to Parliament and saying to Parliament, we've got a team together. What does that team have to do, and how do they do it? But this is where we make a mistake, Advocate Celia. We create the impression that we have the ability to investigate those matters, and that is the wrong idea. We ought to guide those investigations, work within stipulated timeframes, which is something we haven't done, and that is where we have failed.
Well,
and that is why we haven't ended up with prosecutions, with all respect. But it's not just that matter. I think there's several matters that could have been prosecuted. And then it begs the question. The NPA sits with the Specialized Commercial Crimes Unit. And one has to ask, are they doing what they ought to do in terms of delivering the objectives with regards to the corruption? And the simple answer is no. And because there's a lack of leadership and will with regards to those matters, and that is the truth. It may not be the liked answer, but that is the truth.
I initially decided not to refer to the case because of my own personal involvement, but because of the fact that this case now obtained quite relevance in the inquiry, and that's the Celebi case. Yes. You'll appreciate. I will refer to it. During the evidence, it came out that a very prominent person in the NPA, I'm not going even to refer to his name, you can if you want to, his wife received a very substantial donation from Mr. Kebbel Sr. Do you recall that? In the form of shares.
No, I don't. If you can jog my memory, I'm prepared to answer
Well,
whatever question there
recall
is.
the name. Mr. Pikoli himself testified in the trial against the late Mr. Celebi, not so?
Yes, he did.
Yes. And he was confronted with the fact that his wife received a donation of millions of rands of shares from the Kebbels.
I remember you putting that version.
Not only putting it, Mr. Pikoli admitting it.
Yes.
You can recall that.
Yes.
Shortly thereafter, all cases against Mr. Brett Kebbel were dropped. Not so. That was also the evidence, admitted by Mr. Pikoli.
I'm not sure which cases he referred to, because at the time, the investigation, the financial investigation, Advocate
It
Andrea,
was financial cases.
yes, those
Yes.
cases were still continuing, because he wasn't the only target, for lack of a better word. So I'm not sure what cases he talked of.
Well, I think it was referred to as the factoring cases. But the fact is, those cases, they never proceeded against Mr. Kebbel Sr., not so.
I can't recall that they were.
Well, that is my problem. Mr. Pikoli's defense was, but the donation was to his wife, not to him. Can you recall that? Startling evidence as far as I was concerned.
I think he said something about what's his is his, what's hers is theirs. I think that was the kind of answer he gave you. And I recall that.
His defense was that he was married out of community to his wife, and therefore it was not a donation to him, and therefore he should not be criticized. Can you recall that?
I don't recall.
Now, did you do anything? Because prima facie, I'm not saying it was unlawful, but prima facie, it appeared to justify investigation. I'll not go further than that. Would you agree with me?
On that scenario, yes.
Did you do anything? You were in court when that was testified to.
Yes, we were in court, but I know personally that I hadn't dealt with any of the matters thereafter. So I cannot tell you that anything was done. I honestly cannot tell you that anything was done.
I can tell you from objective evidence, nothing was done.
I take you at your word, Advocate Celia. I cannot answer for why nothing was done. I also cannot tell you if anything was done.
Well, I haven't got insight into the workings of the NPA, but I'm sure if anything was done, it would have been reported in the press.
I'm sure it would have been.
Now, that's my concern. You're in court, you hear this evidence that prima facie at least needs some investigation, and I'll go no further than that at this stage, and yet you didn't do anything.
I concede I didn't do anything. But at the time, and you know very well, in the manner in which that matter was dealt with, it was a collective decision. And at the time, I know that as part of a team, I know that we didn't discuss that issue. But if that issue was perhaps discussed outside of me, I cannot tell you that, because you appreciate that at the time, in terms of much of the work that was done, Advocate Nell and Mr. Leesk and the team would take decisions as well on some of the matters. So I'm being fair and honest when I say I cannot tell you what was done, but I didn't do anything. Whether I should have done something, I don't know where I sit right now, because what was there for me to do? And one would say...
You need to answer directly. When
Yes.
you were answering the question from Noches, you were very emphatic that
Yes.
you're not a junior partner in this.
Yes.
This was a collective decision, etc., etc. So I think you need to answer directly.
No.
Indeed, the next question, and that has now been raised by the chairperson, you in fact said to a question to one of my colleagues that you were not a junior player, although you were the junior in the case. I think that's what the chair is referring to. That was your words.
Yes, and perhaps to clarify, when I talked, I said to him, when we're talking of the court scenario and one sees me as a junior in the matter. But I was part of the team, and that is why I'm saying to you, Advocate Celia, in all honesty, I do not know that anything was done about that matter. And if you're asking me, should something have been done, based on the facts as you recall them and convey them to me, of course something ought to have been done.
Well, there was even a book written on this subject, not so.
There were lots of books. I haven't read any of the books.
The public took note of this situation, and despite the fact that Mr. Picoli testified under oath to that effect, nothing was ever done to at least investigate it. And that's a concern that I have, and the main concern relating to you, because that's the only relevance it has at this stage, is what have you done when you took note of this fact?
I took note of that fact when we were in court, yes. I did not take note of it afterwards. As in, should I have looked at it afterwards? It wasn't at the time something I considered because we continued with the trial. I take what must be a criticism that maybe in my individual capacity, shouldn't I have looked at that matter? And I cannot make as though I even looked at it. I did not look at the matter.
The only reason why I raise it, Advocate Johnson, is at this stage, as you already agreed to, the public perceives the NPA not to really bona fide follow up on all corruption allegations in the country. And that appeared to me to be one of the instances where this was testified in front of you, inter alia, and nothing was done.
I agree. I agree that, there's truth in some of the perceptions that since then until now, we have perpetuated that perception that we are selective about some of the prosecutions. And that is something that ought to have been corrected. There can be no excuse. I cannot sit here and justify through the years on any of the matters. That would be the wrong thing to do. The right thing to do is to accept that more should have been done, and it just wasn't.
And then secondly, the exemptions of prosecution by the people responsible for the shooting, already extensively referred to by previous panel members. What further concerns me in that regard, you, and I'm saying the royal you, not you personally of course, but your team negotiated and entered into an agreement with these people that if they should testify against the late Commissioner Celebi, they would receive exemptions. That was the agreement in place. That was even disclosed to court. Not so.
Yes.
Yet they were not really important or even relevant witnesses in the Celebi case. And the proof of the pudding is in the eating. In the end, you didn't even call these people as witnesses because of the fact that they couldn't contribute to the trial, and yet you agreed to provide them with an exemption if only they disclosed their willingness to testify against the late Commissioner Celebi. That's a bit of a concern to me. I'm sure you'll understand my concern in this regard.
I do understand your concern. For me, it went more to the murder matter than to the Celebi matter. For me, it went to the murder of the late Brett Keppel. Oh, yeah. That is where I construed the 204s, and that is how I answered your colleague. That is, for me, where the 204s went to. For me, that is the heart of the Section 204 in terms of Mikey Schultz and company. That was the heart of it, was dealing with the death of the late Brett Keppel as a murder.
Well, again, in the end, they were not prosecuted.
In the end, no, they were not prosecuted. Glenn Agliotti, I do believe, was found not guilty. I cannot recall what findings the court made, if any, about their credibility.
They even had a documentary on them. They were on television, even explaining how they met up Mr. Brett Keppel.
I do recall the documentary, Chair, but what I'm saying is I did not follow what the court's findings were with regards to the credibility and or not, and I cannot say.
As advocates, because you exempted them.
And I think that's the unfortunate part, is that in the end, more people lost than we gained from the Section 204.
And in the end, you said Mr. Agliotti was found guilty of drug trafficking.
Yes.
But he received what, a fine. He was not even sentenced to jail for very serious allegations of drug trafficking because of the agreement between you, the royal you, and Mr. Agliotti's legal representatives, not so?
Yes, I think there was a Section 105A plea and sentence agreement, and he ought to have paid a substantial fine.
So in the end, the only person that was really enthusiastically prosecuted was indeed the late Commissioner Levy. The murderers got scot-free, the drug traffickers got scot-free. The only person prosecuted was Commissioner Levy.
I have to add the proviso that not everybody got scot-free, but yes, in terms of the bigger matter, yes, the National Commissioner was prosecuted. And I always firmly believe, when one looks back at it, Advocate Celia, in fairness, I do believe that if the court did not believe the evidence, it would have found otherwise. We were before an open court. Our evidence was tested. It was tested in the appeal court, and all of those stood. And that is where I make peace with the decisions when they are taken, is if the courts find that those decisions are correct.
Now, don't understand me wrong. I'm not criticizing the court process. We're testing your conduct in that case because it has been raised in order to establish whether this panel should indeed put you on a short list to the President for a possible NDPP. So I'm not criticizing the case and or the courts. I'm just eliciting facts from you in order to assist the panel in coming to a proper conclusion in the end.
Look, and I think it's childish if one doesn't take the criticisms as they come. But when one looked at the time at the matter, this was the National Commissioner of Police in charge of a very important institution. And one weighed who he was in relation to what was done and everybody else. It may not make sense right now, but that is how one weighed it. And a person in that position, albeit one considers, the corruption may not have been as much as one looks at now.
It was about
but that is what
20,000 rand that the court eventually convicted him over a period of 7 years.
But the point I think, Advocate Celia, that is important is one was looking at the matter and who we had to deal with. And yes, the name is the late Jackie Celebi, but it could have been another police commissioner. And I think that is the most important principle. I think where we do bog ourselves down, unfortunately, as society, is always going back to who he was. So, yes, the prosecution was against the late Jackie Celebi, but if the National Police Commissioner at the time was Joe Soap, who committed the same offences, I can guarantee you here and now, that would have been the decision to prosecute.
Would you also then have provided exemptions for murderers?
If there was no murder at the time, no.
No,
but if it was a similar scenario and the murder itself was being prosecuted
against the murderers,
if the murder itself on the exact same facts was being prosecuted, I would grant indemnity only for the murder, because the murder of Brett Kebble could not go unpunished. But I cannot talk to the indemnity on the corruption.
But the murder of Kebble did go unpunished.
Because the court found Agliotti not guilty. It
but
was
the
a
murderers
trial.
were never charged.
No, the murderers were never charged. So I understand your frustration, Advocate Celia, that more than just the person who was tried ought to have been tried. But I go back to what the facts were at the time. And I can only deal with what we had at the time. It is easy for us to speculate much after the fact.
To me, the only relevance is it gives us a glimpse of who you will be if you are the NDPP in the exercise of your discretion. And that's the only relevance it is. How will you exercise your discretion? And that's the only reason why I'm asking these questions. I'm not want to start a new
No, I don't think.
prosecution against anybody.
Yes,
We're only testing you in a practical situation where you found yourself.
And I take that for what it is, and that is why I say I had to deal with the facts.
And
One
I'm
dealt with
sorry,
them at the
actually,
time.
you're not the person who should have said. You're the senior of the team should have said there, but you are now the person sitting there.
Yes, and that is why I say, sir, I always have to go back to what we had at the time, and I deal with what we had at the time.
Did the fact influence you that at that stage there was an enormous dispute between very influential people in South Africa about the disbandment of the Scorpions, of which you were part of? Can you recall that? And the late Commissioner Jackie Selebe supported the idea that the Scorpions should be disbanded. Can you recall that?
I do recall that, and what I have to say to you is, of course, it bothered all of us because we felt we were part of a new structure that could create a difference. But what didn't bother me personally, or why it didn't bother me personally, is I was a member of the National Prosecuting Authority, and it is something I made very well known that in as much as it would pain me to have this integrated approach unit, I would still be able to continue to do what I need to do, which is to prosecute, because whilst I was assigned to the Directorate Special Operations, I remained a prosecutor of the NPA. And so, yes, there was much dispute. There was a lot of speculation. I have always contemplated, God willing, that if somebody like Leonard McCarthy had to come back into the country, could somebody please arrest him? Because of all the shenanigans they did, of all the discussions that went on behind the backs of the people who really did the work. You know, it's similar to what I said this morning. There are good prosecutors out there doing the work, regardless of what this panel has to say about the upper structures of the NPA. The same was for the DSO. And unfortunately, some people, like Mr. McCarthy, allowed themselves to be part of a political discussion that didn't talk to whether or not the DSO should remain because it was an effective organization. That was the dispute.
Before we move on, Jackie Selebe, just to understand from you, at that time, there was information that some of the monies that the late Jackie Selebe received under the code name JS could possibly have been Mr. John Sutton, who was also referred to as JS, who is now living large with the process of crime in Australia. Does it ring any bell?
Yes, Chair, it does. And what we did to that end was only consider those transactions where Agliotti was able to say to us, I remember this transaction and I remember that transaction. He didn't remember all of the transactions. And I think, Mr. Saleh, you're correct, but I think if we went through the check stubs, there were only about 7 or 10 that we actually dealt with, because it was those where he was able to give more than just a recollection. There was a bit more particularity that he was able to provide. So one didn't deal with all of the other JS. You had to give credence to the fact that there was more than one reference to a JS, but we only dealt with those where he could say, I gave those to the late Mr. Selebe.
Thank you, Chairperson. Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
I've got some few things to discuss with you. You eloquently gave us your answers on the scenario that we gave to you. And you came out as a person who is firm on her approach and who will only do what is correct. That is what came out of that scenario answering. But when we now get into practical life, you lived in the NPA, I'm seeing a different picture. I'm saying so because you indicated that there was interference in the cases that you were working on, and there is nothing that you did, and that was because of the prevailing situation at the time. How do you reconcile Ms. Johnson in the scenario and Ms. Jensen in the real life within the NPA?
And I said in context, it was that matter at that time in terms of the management as it was. For the rest, for a greater part, and I think one looks at the matters that one deals with, I think the higher profile the matters are, they court controversy where people feel the need to interfere. But in the main, many of the matters that I have dealt with since then have not courted controversy in the sense of no one has considered interfering. So that is how I am able to take the firm decisions that I take, and I'm able to prosecute without fear, favor, or prejudice. And that is why I correctly said this morning, it was deja vu only because of the one particular matter. It does not talk to the rest of the matters that I had to deal with.
Were these cases taken away from you as a result of you not complying with the policies of NPA, or was it because you were not viewed as a person who will deliver the expected results?
It was neither. It was a matter of the expected results is a conviction. So the reason it was taken away is that at the time, the then head of the NPA, Mr. Simelane, and it was only the two matters, the Brett Cable murder matter and the matter against the then head of crime intelligence, Mulangi Mpeko, they were taken away, but no reasons were given. We're a different creature in the way they operate. One doesn't always get justification.
The former NIA person, Mpeko?
Yes, sir.
So
it was just those two, sir, and no reasons given.
So when no reason was given by the head of NPA, did you refer him to the Constitution as to when is he expected to intervene in prosecution?
And I say this respectfully, that I think it's easier looking from the outside in with all of the legislation and the Constitution and say you should have done this. Where we were at, we didn't have the forum to discuss those. So you are removed and you continue with the work that you have. There was no way I could speak to that national director. There are other national directors that one was able to speak to, including people like Mr. Ngasana. On occasion, Advocate Jiba. But at that time, that national director did not want to hear us. It's not about what you want to do. It's understanding where we were at. You were not given a forum. You really were not given a forum, which is currently where the NPA is at as well. You are not given a forum, and it's the ideal situation, sir, that you should be able to say to the person in charge, my duty is to prosecute without fear, favor, or prejudice. You are hindering my duty. It wasn't possible.
So there was a Minister of Justice. Did you approach the Minister of Justice in terms of these interferences?
At that time, I honestly didn't think of doing that.
So you are showing us a picture of a person who can be pushed over.
No, I'm showing you the reality of what was in the NPA. You will not go beyond your national director. And I think we must just be alive to structure and we must be alive to protocol. Where you sit, sir, one is able to think of a scenario and say what one should have done. It's not being a pushover. It's understanding that the decision was taken at a level where I was not able to interact. But what it didn't do is disallow me from doing the rest of my work to the best of my ability. So it may seem easy that, oh, okay, if the national director doesn't hear you, then you get a forum with the Minister of Justice. That isn't how the NPA works, and that isn't how it has worked. So if it is to work like that in the future, well, then that is how it will work in the future. It hasn't worked like that, and I'd like one of my colleagues to come here and say that that is how it actually worked.
So hearing you answering the AJ in terms of the values of the NPA and how you embrace them, I would have expected you to resign from the NPA if you have no hearing and your prosecutorial independence was being compromised, if you really live by those values. Am I wrong there?
You're wrong. And you're wrong only because a specific matter, a specific decision doesn't talk to who I am and what I have to do in the NPA. I am not there to serve the NDPP. My oath is to serve the people of the Republic. If I leave, the difference I make, I deal in the main with murder matters, cash in transit matters, robbery matters. Those are contact crimes. They affect the daily lives of every one of our South African citizens. I can make that difference. So in staying, it's not because I should be allowed to be pushed out. It meant that despite that, in spite of that, I was still able to stand by my oath, maintain my integrity, and make a difference in court, which I do. That I would not have allowed it, more so because it's not who I am. And I think that's the easy route, is to say, well, if I don't get my way, and if my management is not prepared to listen to me, I'm going to pack my bags and go home. It's staying the course.
But to me, it tells me you were only there at the mercy of the NDPP. Had it take other cases from you, you were still going to do the same, and then your independence was going to be frustrated.
No, it wouldn't have been, because it's not the national director who gives us the work. The cases come.
Not who gives you, but who takes away.
And he could have taken in as much as he wanted to. The relationship that I have, especially with the people from whom we get the work, which is the police, in terms of their different units, as well as the Hawks and organized crime. I have the respect of those people, and they still bring their work. So he could have taken as many as he wanted to. I think whatever you do, don't lose sight of the reality we had. It's really something I might seem to be harping on. It's not as easy as it seems. But what is easy is staying. Or at least, what is hard is to stay. It was easy to walk away, and I chose not to walk away. And even though we have not very different situations now in the NPA, sir, I'm not going to walk away, because whoever's chosen as the head of the NPA, if it is not me, requires all of our collective support to make sure that cases are prosecuted, because not as many of the cases currently that ought to be prosecuted are being prosecuted.
You are answering to my colleague, Mr. Nojesi, on this aspect, gave me an impression that you will only be firm when the conditions allow. And when conditions are tough, you will also give in.
Oh, most certainly not. I may not have alluded to all of the conditions, but no matter what I have faced with, in as much as one has the idea that, yes, if you're faced with a tough situation, it's only been those two. It's the removal of those matters. It's not a decision I'm able to make. But at the same time, it does not mean that I always have to have my way. No. That is why I'm still there dealing with the cases that I have to deal with, making sure that when I go to the lower courts, I'm able to inspire the prosecutors to carry on for us to do the work, regardless of what we may be hearing in the media. And when I do engage with our senior management or with my colleagues alike, is the ability to say, what do we need to do? What is our strategic plan? What are our timeframes, and achieving those? It's not that if you're faced with a situation, then you back down. That was not a back down situation. It was a situation where you were not given a choice. I was not given a choice. And where I'm given a choice and have to take a decision, then I am firm in my decision, yes.
We can leave that one. But I want to understand this 204. I want to understand 204. Maybe this question that I have, many people might be having in terms of 204. Were these killers, murderers, who were given amnesty in terms of Section 204, also involved in the corruption case of Mr. Slave?
If I recall, and Advocate Andrea, you're there, and so if you have to refresh my memory, please do. But if I recall, it was simply about them knowing that the late Mr. Celebi met with Agliotti at premises that would have been for Brett Kebble. Do I recall correctly, Advocate Celia? Something in that vein. But that is what I recall about what they would have said. If you're going to ask me now the significance, you'll catch me unawares.
I'm not going to talk on the significance.
You advocate, you put this case of Selibe as part of your highlights. So I'm finding it difficult for you not to recall the actual facts of the case in order to answer the panelist's question.
I understand that, but I haven't gone back through the details of the matter. That is why I said there are some things, yes, that I can recall a bit more vividly, not for lack of wanting to recall. Not everything played a significant role at the time. If that is what I recall about how they would have been involved in that corruption matter, is talking to the so-called relationship between the late Mr. Celebi and Agliotti on the premises of Brett Kebo, where they would have witnessed them associating with one another. That is what I recall.
But they were not going to be accused in any day in the corruption charge with Commissioner Celebi.
No, and the reason for that is that in terms of how the corruption was dealt with, one talked to transactions. They did not say they witnessed transactions. So they, and that is what I recall, is that they didn't say they witnessed the transactions and or, for example, part of the allegations being that Agliotti would take the late Mr. Celebi to certain clothing shops and buy clothing and all of that, and those formed part of the corruption. From my recollection, they were not witnesses to that. They were witnesses to certain meetings and or getting-togethers, for lack of a better word.
Okay, my understanding is easier. Council will agree with me to grant 204 to people who committed offense together. But your case is weak on them and we want to get the kingpin or the main character. This is how I understand it. Then you can then use those who maybe were weaklings or maybe who were pressured to commit the offense in order to get to the one who is the steering in this crime. And I do not see this picture in the Celebi case.
I understand that you don't see that picture because it's like I say to you now, that they, from my recollection of it, were not, and except for talking to a relationship and or meetings, they were not going to say anything more. And that is why I say, for me, the 204 talked more to the murder. And again, it goes back to what Advocate Andrea says, is perhaps they should have been prosecuted for the murder.
But that is my biggest problem with you. I do not think I can trust you to head NPA if you can come with such decisions.
It's a decision that was taken based on the evidence at the time. And it's not about whether or not you're going to trust me as the head of the NPA. It is saying what I had at the time and how did I exercise my discretion. In hindsight, everybody can criticize a decision. It is the evidence at the time and what the objective was to prosecute. It's got nothing to do with trust. It has everything to do with your prosecutorial independence and integrity. Based, and that is how prosecutions work, sir. Fact, law, and put them together. That is what we did. I will not be able to sit here and in good conscience and good faith say to you, you have a right not to trust me. You may not like my decision. You may not understand the reasoning and the reasons behind what we used to arrive at the decision. That by no means takes away my integrity and my trustworthiness.
So
not at all.
Thank you. Another matter, I don't think it is your matter, which brings the very same scenario. If you have learned of this matter, I'm raising this because the way the line of your thinking could land us in this type of situation time and again in the future if you are heading the institution. There was a case against one Mr. McBride for drunk and driving.
Yes.
For the state to prove this case against him, they have to pardon the armed robbers in order for them to testify that on that day they were with Mr. McBride and he was drunk. So I find this thing to be worrying to me. Do you remember of that setup?
I don't recall the details of that matter because I hadn't, dealt with it or followed it. But if that is the exact scenario you're giving, if you asked me to make that decision, it's not a 204 you would grant, not to those armed robbers, as opposed to achieving a conviction on drunk driving. When the 204 in the murder matter was given, it was to achieve a conviction on murder. To achieve a conviction on drunk driving, you cannot condone the conduct of the rest. What my approach would have been is to ask them to plead, you hold off on the sentence, you get them to testify through the trial. If the court finds them to be credible witnesses, then one considers what sentence to be imposed. But in that scenario, you are correct in your summation.
Thank you. You indicated that it would not be proper for you to hide your face in the sand and not accept the problems in the NPA. But when it was taken further, and now from a judgment to say the situation in the NPA was paralyzing instability, you wanted to sever away the issue of paralyzing. And when I hear all these things, you were paralyzed from doing your job because of the instability in the NPA in the two cases. And we're talking about only you. There could be other people who were also paralyzed. Don't you agree that the judge was correct when we're saying that instability was paralyzing to the function of the NPA?
I did qualify to say, I think maybe it's my understanding of the word paralyzed. For me, the paralyzed is as though we're doing nothing. And that is why I said it would be unfair to my junior colleagues who are doing prosecutions on any given day in any given court. But if you are talking to our decision-making process, those that need to take decisions and to be able to push the NPA forward, yes, there is the paralyzing instability. I do not think that one should filter that instability down to the operational portion in terms of the day-to-day activities of our prosecutors. But I can't argue myself away from that instability being paralyzing if we're talking about certain structures within the NPA and more so the management of the NPA.
Finally, if you are recommended or if the president is to appoint you, don't you think or don't you have issues or skeletons which might compromise you in being an appropriate NDPP?
No, I don't.
Thank you.
No, I don't. Perhaps unless you consider my skeleton being why we took a decision with the 204s, that would come to haunt me. But no, not in terms of any of the work I've done and not in my personal life, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Advocate Mahi.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning once again, Advocate Johnson. Let's start first with the case study that we were given. Okay. I'm going to differ a little bit with the panel member, Advocate Majola, and Mr. Sugogo next to me on how you dealt with the case study. I found your response to the case study very, or rather, let me start here. The allegations that have been leveled against this foreign national, you would agree with me that they're very serious. May they be, from a whistleblower, but they're very serious. As they go to the state security of the Republic.
Yes, they are.
So, you would agree with me then that would have necessitated or warranted investigation of that matter, of those allegations?
Yes, but not by the Deputy National of the NPA.
We will come to that.
Yes.
You would agree with me that if indeed state security is threatened, regardless of who brings that information to you, that would warrant serious attention and investigation of that matter.
Correct.
You do not say that in your response.
I think it's because I say in my response, and I dealt with it in terms of where it was raised that the matter ought to have immediately been brought to the attention of the Hawks, that is the crimes against the state, as well as state security. And that is where the investigation should start and continue. That is the agency.
Yes, but you did not say anything about what you would have done in that case to bring that, what you just said, to the relevant individuals in authority to do something about it, because you have perceived this as a threat to national security.
I think it's because I answered the scenario in terms of the individual, and you would see the answer there. In terms of the response to Advocate Ngwenya, I said he ought to have immediately brought it to the attention, because I was dealing with the scenario in terms of the persons that were given the specific roles and functions. Maybe I misunderstand you, saying maybe I ought to have taken a different approach and say I should. But what I'm saying is Advocate Ngwenya dealt with it, and I pointed out to Advocate Ngwenya that it ought to have been, as a matter of urgency, brought to the attention of the investigating authorities.
You're now putting it back to Ngwenya to do something. You yourself, you're not doing anything about it, although you perceive the allegations to be serious to the state security.
My Deputy National is...
Can I just tell you what I deduce your answers to that question? I deduce that to be hiding behind procedure and protocol. You have this sensitive information about state security being about to be compromised, and you hide behind procedure, hierarchy, and where this should be. You're not doing anything about it.
I am. I am making sure that my official who's dealing with it is directed to deal with it correctly. You see, that is where the issue is. National directors get themselves involved in issues they shouldn't get involved in. I have an official. That is the role and function of my official. He received the information. Where in the Act, in the Constitution, is it my role that I have to? I have an official dealing with the matter. My official must correctly ensure that crimes against the state, as well as state security, deal with the matter immediately. That is my function. My function is to ensure that that gets done. And that is the problem. National directors have been allowed to venture into the arena where they shouldn't. They are delegated functions, sir. Right. And it's not about hiding behind policy and protocol. You cannot walk away from the fact that in terms of the structure, our powers and our mandate, they are delegated functions. And I choose that the person who got the information is now duly authorized and requested to make sure that it is taken to the correct forum. The difference would have been, Advocate Mani, if I didn't direct what the Deputy National ought to have done. I directed what you ought to have done and should do. Therein lies the difference.
Who would have brought that information to the National Director then?
No, bear in mind, the information has been brought to me.
Yes.
I am reminding my Deputy National that we do not have the authority to investigate, and that he should have dealt immediately with crimes against the state and state security. It's brought to my attention. It is how I deal with what is brought to my attention that is important.
Right. Now, you would accept that currently we have the state capture inquiry going on.
Yes.
And that was as a result of people that refused to be silenced where national interest and security was involved, correct?
Correct.
They were ridiculed. It came at heavy loss to themselves, personal prejudice to themselves, but they never relented and never shied away from raising their voice. And hence today we have the state capture inquiry going on. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I do.
We had also the Arms Deal Commission following also on the same track, that there were certain individuals, patriots of this country, that refused to buckle under pressure, to be silenced, to huge cost to themselves, correct?
Correct.
Now, here is information that involves state security. All you are taking is the position that, okay, procedurally, this is what needs to happen. And you revert it back to the person that brought this information to you. You yourself, you're not doing anything about it. Instead of just saying, I will take it upon myself to engage heads of these departments now that state security is threatened.
If you do go to my response to the head of state security, I advised or requested that we meet as a matter of urgency so that we can get together, discuss what needs to be done, and put together a coordinated approach. I made that suggestion. It is in my response.
All right. Maybe I missed it. Thank you.
Yes, it is in my response.
I will not go to the issues of the case of Agliotti and Brad Cable that my fellow members have dealt with. Now, let's deal with the perceptions, okay? And if you ask me, justified perception of the society in relation to the performance of the NPA. When you have these high-profile cases that most of the people that come from the NPA that came before this panel saw it fit to highlight them in their motivation for the appointment or in their CVs, as you also did so. And the perception created by highlighting these cases to the general public is that you dealt with these matters, you took decisions in performance of your functions as a public official in the NPA, correct?
Yes.
All right. Now these decisions, the very same society doesn't understand them because they're too technical. Your answers to how these decisions and why they were taken is found basically behind the layers and layers of the inner workings in the NPA. How do you explain that? Please just try to figure this out and try to explain this like you would explain it to a 2-year-old. For the society to understand exactly how murderers, how armed robbers are left off the hook in certain of these cases where there is prima facie case. These people are left off the hook. The chair has already directed you to say some of these people are living large, overseas, free, enjoying freedom, whereas they have committed crimes, serious crimes for that matter, and they've never been pursued. How do you explain that in simple terms for a member of the society out there to actually take you seriously when you're applying for this position to say, this is the person that can still tomorrow take decisions fearlessly, guarding the public interest in these matters?
It's somewhat of a challenge in terms of the matter one alludes to, because it's a matter that's already been dealt with. And
I'm not talking about the matter per se, I'm talking about the decision-making process.
Yes, I'm getting
how
to
you would explain that.
Is that matter for me somewhat of a challenge in answering how one says that to the public. Simply to say to the public that in as much as it's technical, and I get that. So that is my issue with why it is not as easy to explain to the public why one made that decision at the time. But if you take every other decision, or maybe I should deal with that decision, is to say to the public what I did do, even though you may not understand it, is I had to weigh what I wanted to achieve. And unfortunately, in what I wanted to achieve, I chose to prosecute this person and didn't prosecute that. That is the only simple way to answer it without being technical, because you have to be fair. It is a technical answer, which a man on the street is not going to understand. But if I take every other matter that I dealt with,
let's not go to any other matters. I just wanted an answer to that one that I just was
that's the best way I can answer, is that at the time I looked at what I had. I needed to understand what I want to achieve, and to achieve that I made this decision. And I used the law, and that is a bit more technical to explain.
Now, would it be fair of the very same member or members of the society to say to you that you were actually complacent in letting off those criminals off the hook in your decision-making process? Remember, you're talking about now
Men on the street.
Exactly.
The man
Emanating from your answer, they simply say that you were complacent. You were part of the decision that should not have been taken at all.
The man on the street is going to see it like that, yes. And I can't take away his view. But what I will continue to say to the man on the street is, what I had, this is what I wanted to achieve, and that is the decision I made. And the man on the street will continue to say, I do not accept what you have done. And I have to make peace with that you don't like and or understand and or accept that decision. It is their right. It is their prerogative. But what the public must understand is, in as much as they may not like the decision, it was an honest decision based on fact and law. That is what the public must understand about me, if we're talking about me, is I always have to deal with the fact and the law. So it doesn't matter who. Please know that the decision was made based on that. That is how the NPA is supposed to operate.
Okay. I note your answer involved only the law and what else?
It's the facts, it's the
Facts
law.
and the law, yes.
Yes.
What about public interest?
Public interest is very important, yes.
You never mentioned it.
But while I was talking to you in terms of explaining to the public that I dealt with that matter in terms of the facts and in terms of the law. Public interest at the time, yes, it played a role. Of course, in all of the matters, it has to play a role. But what I'm saying is when you explain to the person on the street, he understands that there's law, there's fact, and then there's prosecution. That is the basis on which I would have explained it to the man on the street.
All right. Let's deal with the inner workings and the NPA. You'll agree with me that complacency, corruption would render the inner workings of the NPA to be dysfunctional. And that they would find themselves at odds with constitutional judgment of prosecuting without fear, favor, or prejudice.
If I could ask, it depends on what complacency advocate is referring to. Complacency in regards to prosecution of matters.
Yes.
Yes.
Have you ever been pressured in pursuing criminal charges against certain individuals for political agenda?
No. I think because the difference with this matter was...
and I'm not referring about that matter. Forget about that.
That's what I'm saying. That was the only time I could say to you there might have been, or there was some kind of political interference, but it was not in terms of prosecuting a specific way. It was not to prosecute. But me personally, I have not been put in that situation.
Have you ever been pressured in not pursuing criminal proceedings against certain individuals for political agenda?
Not in the matters I've had to deal with.
Have you ever been pressured into not prosecuting certain individuals in advancement of the economic agendas of certain institutions or
no,
entities?
Sir. Not at all.
Right. It appears to me that in dealing with because you would agree with me that once you say there is, and you accept that there is instability in the NPA, there are factions in the NPA. The NPA is then not working optimally.
Correct.
Correct? Right. Now, if that is the case, you have been in the NPA aware of these factions, aware of the divisions, groupings that are rendering suboptimal service to the public, and you have not done anything about that. You are merely waiting to be appointed or to be promoted before you yourself could do anything about that. Basically, you are just riding the storm until such time that you get to a point where you are either recommended by this panel to the president, and he appoints you, and then it's only then that you'll do something tangible about this to change the course of events in the NPA.
And that is where you are incorrect. And I say so based on where I'm situated and what I have to do. I'm situated at the DPP's office in Pretoria. we are given matters to consider for prosecution. Decisions are taken daily to prosecute on cases. I also go to court and I prosecute cases. So I don't wait for something to happen. Whilst there is this instability, me, like many of my other colleagues, are actually working. I'm delivering a service to the public. I'm not waiting in the wings for something. Yes, this is an opportunity that has come up. But if this opportunity didn't come up, I will continue to prosecute. And I think that is the anomaly, unfortunately, sir, is where we find ourselves in terms of the structure currently and what it is I'm able to do to change that narrative. And the narrative I'm able to change is by making sure I am at court, I'm ready for my cases, and I'm giving service to the public whom I'm supposed to serve.
All right. Yesterday, one applicant came before this panel and said there is a culture at the NPA that this panel has to understand, and to a larger extent that the public society out there must also understand. And it appears to me that you are going back to the very same culture by saying that there is certain manner with which things are done at the NPA, that you cannot go over them because they have to be done that way. Is that what I have to deduce from what you say?
What I'm saying is, where I am at, I am unable to, in terms of, I'm a Senior Deputy Director of Public Prosecutions. Yes. I have a DPP who is my head, and then there is the head of NPS, and then there is the National Director. What I was saying in my response to you, sir, is I don't let the instability stop my core function. My core function is to prosecute. My core function is dual in that I am to manage my personnel and to manage my cases.
Can I just
that continues.
We're not talking here about you as an individual and what you do on a daily basis. We are talking about the inner workings of the institution, the NPA itself,
okay,
which you are part of.
Yes.
And which some of the decisions that have been taken in the NPA, which you are part of as well, because you refused, you said it to Mr. Nochese that you did not regard yourself as a junior in the certain decision-making in the NPA in consideration of certain matters, correct?
Correct.
Right. Now, what I want to find out from you is, you are aware of the instability that is prevailing in the NPA from where you were. Did you raise your concerns with anyone above you?
Yes.
Did you continue to raise your concerns about the instability that has been manifested in the NPA?
Yes, we have, and yes, I have. If you go back to, we have at the DPP's office our management meetings and our quarterly reviews, and it has been raised there because our DPP represents us as an office when he goes to NPA management. And many of the issues I know I have raised. If one goes back to the minutes of those meetings, you will see that those issues are raised. From why our performance indicators changed. We ask about the controversies we read in the paper. We ask the DPP because he interacts on that level. We've raised I have raised my unhappiness with how matters are assigned, how people are brought from different units to deal with matters. All of the issues that need to be raised are raised at a management meeting. That is my line of protocol that I have to observe. So no one keeps quiet about it. The issue is raised. I raise it in my management meeting.
You said, when I asked you a question, whether have you been pressured in pursuing criminal proceedings against any individual to advance political agenda, you said no.
No, not that I know that it's a political agenda.
All right. Now, you stated earlier that there is a lot of political interference with the NPA. Okay? That's what you said?
Yes.
You recall that?
Yes.
What did you mean by that?
I look at the matters that are currently running, and it is my perception that there is political interference.
Is it a perception or fact? You stated that as a fact, that there is political interference.
Let me correct myself. I have a perception there because I don't deal with those matters directly. I look at the state capture matters and I look at what one ought to have done and where those matters are. If I take the Estina Dairy matter, for example, I would not have dealt with the matter in that way. I am of the firm view that there are certain matters for which we step back because there's political interference. If I take the matter, for example, with...
Would that be a perception or effect?
The state capture matter, I have a perception. If I take the Praveen Gordhan prosecution, there I say it's political interference, but it is based...
Let's not talk about... I don't want us to talk about a particular case. I was talking about political interference, and you said that is only your perception.
In terms of certain matters,
yes.
And in terms of the one matter...
matters that you actually know that there is here as a fact, not a perception that there has been a political interference.
Of my own personal knowledge, no. But
you would not have stated it, Advocate Johnson, that there is political interference if it was only a perception.
Perhaps, I think it's a fine line to draw between the perception and the reality. And if you'd allow me an opportunity to explain the why. If there are certain matters where, if you look at the state capture and how slow we are going, that is my perception. And I think I take it from where I am as a prosecutor and how one would have dealt with the matter. It's a perception. But if I take an actual prosecution, if you'd please allow me, sir, if I take an actual prosecution, if you take, for example, the Praveen Gordhan matter, the reason I say this political interference is the national director goes to a meeting at Latuli House. It's in the public domain. The very next day, there is an announcement that there is a prosecution. That cannot be perception.
All right.
I may not have been privy to the meeting, and that is why I'm saying in some instances, the perception is not based on a thumbsuck. I guess it is more about what you know should happen with matters and what actually happens with matters. Same like what you raised when we dealt with the late Jackie Celebi matter and or with the Section 204s. There's a perception that how a matter ought to have been and how it actually was is incorrect. And that is what I'm saying to you. I can't take away that perception, nor can anyone take away my perception that how matters are currently dealt with, as opposed to how they ought to have been dealt with, create the perception that there is political interference.
Let me tell you what I find odd about the applicants that come from the NPA that came before this panel, that have stated numerous times that there is instability in the NPA, but failed to admit or to disclose what is really at the root cause. They have all, including yourself, they have all been coy about exactly what is going on. You mentioned political interference, you don't want to take it further than that. Right? You don't want to take it further than that. I'm not going to pursue you to actually take it further. I'm just stating the fact as I'm seeing them unveiled before us. That you state all this infighting, personal, narrow personal interest in the NPA in relation to all your colleagues, but you don't want to take it further than that. You're just simply hinting at that. It's fine, let's not take it further than that.
No, but I think that would, in all fairness, that would be unfair, because I have alluded to instances, for example, where I was removed from a unit, and I know that, and I said the who, I said the why, where we were removed from matters. I think what you must have an appreciation for, Advocate, is not just myself and for the rest of my colleagues. This is an interview for the position of the National Director. I remain an employee of the NPA. I have to be honest and upfront, which is what we have been. There are many perceptions that we have to deal with. Like I said when I started, yes, one hears of the factions. One may not necessarily personally have had to deal with those factions. And one may not necessarily know how they are constituted. That does not mean myself or any of my colleagues before me are coy or shying away from it. You have to bear in mind that people are not openly talking about the factions. People are not openly saying who's doing what and what they're doing wrong. So I don't want us to create, again, a perception that we are coy and shying away from it. One is alluding to it, yes, but if you ask me for the in-depth explanation, I cannot give you all of the detail because I'm not privy to that detail.
What do you want the general...
Advocate, let's move towards winding up.
Winding up, that is actually the last question. Okay. What do you want the general public to make of what you just said right now? The general public, forget addressing the lawyers and this panel, about what you just said.
The general public should understand that some of us are prepared to accept the reality of where we are, that things are not as they should be, and that there are some of us who would like to make sure that they get the service they deserve. And the service they deserve is having an honest, confident national director who understands that I don't own the organization, I am the head of that organization. I need to make sure I take my people back to the mandate, which is to serve the public. And whatever happens now, as the new national director, that I am prepared to walk in, consider all of the discussions that we've had, be it about the factions, be it about the perceptions, and say to the public, whatever decisions are taken, at the end, the only person who ought to win and who will win will be the public, because the prosecutions will be increased, the manner in which we work will be different, and you can count on us to take the correct decision. That is what the public must hear from me today.
Thank you very much, Chair.
On that high note, maybe ohloniphekile ukhona umbuzo ofuna usibuza?
No. Just to say thank you for the opportunity. And whilst you are an all-male panel, I trust that you will do right, not by me or the other 10 individuals who come before and after me, but you will do right by the Constitution, do right by the Republic, and do right by the people that the National Director and the NPA ought to serve. And where we have failed, rectify that situation, please, by making sure that you put in the correct person to do the job. No.
No previous convictions?
Anginazo. Ngilala namehla avaliwe bayi-2. Akekho ozongenathi udinga isofa yami ngoba ngithatha imali yakhe ngiyakolota, akukho lokho.
Awuyasikhuluma isiZulu.
Ngiyanibongela. Thank you, Chair.
We have also broken the record. We have been interviewed for 2 hours, 45 minutes. It's a record.
Regardless of the time that was spent, Chair, I hope I was able to make a meaningful and fruitful contribution, and I wish you all well in your deliberations. That's all I can do.
Thank you very much, colleagues. I'm told that if we get the next candidate right now, it will run into lunchtime, so we can have a break, then we can come back at 1:15 for the interview with Advocate Rodney. No, Tikok. Yeah, Rodney is his name.
Thank you. I'm young. Yo, i-rock ne-makeup uthi ngiyang. Ungangiceleli ID. Thank you.
And